You're calling me. When the lawyer, Mr. Douglas Finch, cleared his throat and solemnly announced that my Aunt Eleanor had left her entire estate to her dog, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. The words sounded distant, dreamlike, like someone had muted reality and replaced it with a bad joke. To my beloved Pomeranian Sir Barkington, I bequeath the entirety of my estate, $7.4 million, including my residence, my vintage Corvette, all my jewelry, and remaining personal assets. He read it slowly, as if repeating it would somehow make it more believable. For a full second, the room was silent, then it erupted. Chelsea let out this shrill, glass-shattering laugh that sliced through the air like a car alarm. Her overly manicured hand clutched her chest like she couldn't breathe from the hilarity. Brandon actually leaned back in his leather chair and started clapping like it was some elaborate prank show reveal. "You've got to be kidding me," he choked out between wheezing laughs, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. I didn't laugh. I couldn't move. I sat frozen, my spine stiff, my hands clenched into tight fists in my lap. My fingernails dug half-moons into my palms as I stared blankly at the polished conference table in front of me. I blinked hard, over and over, like if I refused to look away, maybe the world would blink back into something that made sense. Chelsea turned toward me with a smirk so sweet it was almost sour. "Well, I guess Sir Barkington appreciated her more than you did," she said in that smug, fake, syrupy voice she always used when she was twisting a knife. I didn't even look at her. My chest was tight, my heart hammering like it wanted out, and my throat was sealed shut with a lump of disbelief. Why this woman, this elegant, stubborn, brilliant woman, had been more than an aunt to me. When my mother died, it was Eleanor who stepped in. She didn't hesitate, didn't consult a lawyer or social services. She just got in her car, drove 7 hours through a snowstorm, and brought me home. She taught me how to part my hair evenly, how to thread a needle, how to speak up when someone talked over me. She taught me grace and resilience, and how to see through people like Chelsea and Brandon. And when she started to fade in her final months, I was the one there. Every single doctor's visit, every late-night panic attack, every trembling moment when she couldn't lift a spoon, I was there. Chelsea and Brandon. They sent fruit baskets. Sometimes. They popped in at Christmas, always with phony grins and empty hands, eyes scanning the living room for anything worth inheriting. And now they were laughing. Laughing because everything had gone to a tiny fluff ball with a rhinestone collar. My eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not in front of them. Across the table, Mr. Finch maintained a practiced calm, his lawyer's poker face barely flickering. But I noticed the subtle shift, the slight squaring of his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting toward me. He kept reading, but the words blurred in my ears. I couldn't process anything else. My skin felt like it was on fire, every nerve ending lit up in disbelief. Why would she do this? Why would Aunt Eleanor, the woman who had been my only real family, leave everything to a dog? Chelsea leaned in close to Brandon, whispering something that made him chuckle again. He pulled out his phone, probably already making notes to list the house online like it was a done deal. And that's when it came rushing back, a memory sharp and clear like a sunbeam breaking through fog. 2 weeks before she passed, Eleanor had been lucid, more alert than I'd seen her in months. We were sitting on the garden bench, surrounded by blooming lavender, the air cool and crisp. She reached out, placed her soft, trembling hand over mine, and said, "Grace, I need you to keep something safe for me." She pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope from her sweater pocket, my name written across the front in her elegant, careful script. "I updated my will," she told me. "It's different now. Just open it, if anything feels off." Back in that sterile office, my fingers instinctively went to my bag. My heartbeat kicked up. I pushed past my phone keys wallet until I felt the envelope. Untouched. Unopened. Just as she had given it to me. I stood up. My voice was low but unwavering. "There's another will." The laughter died with an audible finality, like a record needle screeching across vinyl. Brandon's smirk drained from his face as though someone had flipped a switch, leaving behind only a slack-jawed silence. Chelsea stiffened her back, going rigid in the chair spine, as straight as a sword. All eyes turned to me, their gazes sharp and incredulous, as if I had suddenly sprouted wings or announced I'd seen a ghost. My hand trembled as I held the envelope out into the air between us, a simple gesture weighted with the gravity of everything I hadn't yet said. This one I said quietly was signed 2 weeks before she died. Their stunned silence vibrated like a taut string. And maybe you're wondering how something so absurd could be real. How a woman who once meant everything to me could sign her name to a document that handed over her entire world to a dog. And believe me, I wondered too. I questioned everything in that moment. But before we go any further into the unraveling chaos that followed in that cold, claustrophobic office, with its sterile walls and too bright lights, you need to understand who Eleanor Whitmore really was, and what she was to me. And, because if you're still watching, if you've ever lost someone who meant more than words, can explain or stepped up when no one else did, then maybe this story will mean something to you, too. And if it does, I'd be honored if you'd like this video or subscribe to the channel. These are the stories I want to keep sharing, the ones that matter, the ones that remind us we're not alone. After my mother died when I was just 9 and too young to fully comprehend what being alone truly meant, no one stepped forward. My father had already disappeared into the mist of some other life. Some other woman long before cancer finished the job of erasing my mother. The other relatives had their excuses ready, distant, busy, unfit, ill-equipped. A few cards, some lilies, and polite condolences. That was all. But Eleanor. She didn't send flowers. She showed up. She drove through the night and arrived before the sun hair still set in perfect waves, eyes stormy with purpose. She never left. She didn't file custody papers or make grand pronouncements. She simply opened her front door and held mine in hers. She wasn't the type to kiss scraped knees or coo lullabies. She had elegance that intimidated always in silk robes by sunrise red lipstick perfectly painted as though Vogue photographers might materialize at any moment. She exuded presence, a woman of ritual and rhythm. But beneath the cool exterior was a heart as tender as a bruise. She taught me to use my voice when I wanted to disappear, to sew on a button and carry myself like I belonged. And when the world turned on me, she turned toward me. She saw me. We weren't just niece and aunt. Ours was something more fluid, messier, closer to mother and daughter in everything but legal form. She didn't inherit me. She chose me. And when 3 years ago she took her first hard fall and I moved back into that house that still smelled of rose soap and lemon polish, she said, "You don't have to stay, Grace." But her eyes told the truth. She didn't want me to go, and truthfully, I didn't want to either. Those last few years were slow and quiet, filled with soft joys. We baked her childhood recipes from memory, the house warm with vanilla and nutmeg. We watched reruns of British murder mysteries where everyone had a motive and no one got away clean. We took measured walks through her garden where lavender grew in little violet armies. And Sir Barkington, her Pomeranian prince, was always by her side, strutting around in tiny outfits that rivaled my own wardrobe. I used to joke he was her third child after Chelsea and Brandon, though of course neither of them ever picked up the phone unless there was something in it for them. They came around for holidays usually empty-handed, sometimes not even pretending to care. They'd fake laughter, flash their polished teeth, and make thinly veiled comments about the silverware. Eleanor would watch them go, with a raised brow, and mutter under her breath, "Vultures, those two." Still, they were family, and she never said more. I watched her fade slowly, first her balance, then her memory. But she never stopped being her. Even in the moments when she stood in the kitchen staring blankly at a light switch, she was still the woman who had saved me once, who still did in 100 quiet ways. On her good days, she'd sip her tea and regale me with stories from the 70s, her voice strong, her eyes twinkling. I was the one who filled her pill organizer, who helped her in the bath when her knees buckled, who sat beside her in the dead of night when fear gripped her like a fever and I could only offer the soft lullabies she once sang to me. So when she passed, I expected heartbreak. I expected grief. But betrayal was a blade I never saw coming. Reading that, the one where she left everything to Sir Barkington, felt like someone had overwritten our story with a stranger's hand. It was like being erased. But then in that moment I remembered. That garden, that afternoon, the lavender in bloom. She had been so lucid that day, so completely herself, her voice clear and unwavering. "This one feels right," she'd said, pressing that envelope into my palm. "Keep it safe." And I had. Because I trusted her. Because she had trusted me. So when I stood up and placed that envelope on the table, I wasn't just delivering a document. I was defending something sacred. I was defending us. Mr. Finch accepted the envelope with reverence like it might detonate if handled carelessly. He studied the seal first, his brow furrowing slightly, then glanced at the date. His gaze lifted to meet mine, and something shifted in his expression. Not skepticism, not surprise, recognition. "This appears to be a later version," he said carefully, almost ceremonially. "I'll need a moment to examine it." Chelsea jolted upright, the movement sharp and sudden. "Wait, what is that?" she demanded. Brandon scoffed. "She's bluffing. That's probably a grocery list." Their voices scratched at the edges of my patience, their arrogance scraping something raw inside me. They really believed this was all just another game, a performance. I didn't answer. I just looked at Mr. Finch and waited. He removed 2 pages from the envelope, thick, ivory-hued paper creased from careful storage, but still pristine. He read silently, lips thinning into a line. The room held its breath. Chelsea's eyes pierced the side of my face like daggers. Brandon, no longer lounging, had leaned forward, his eyes flicking between the lawyer and the will, like a man watching a fuse burn. And all I could think was, please let this be real. Not for the house, not for the money, but because if I had misunderstood her, if this wasn't what she intended, then it would feel like losing her all over again. Finally, Mr. Finch looked up. His voice was even but unflinching. "This document is dated 2 weeks after the original. It is properly notarized, signed, and witnessed." Chelsea's mouth fell open. "What?" She gasped, her voice cracking like glass underfoot. No, she wasn't thinking straight by then. She couldn't have known what she was doing. But I saw the tremor in her perfectly manicured hands, the way her polished nails began drumming on the table, an old tell from our childhood arguments. Brandon sat in silence, jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might snap. Finally, he spoke, his voice brittle and slow. "Let's not jump to conclusions." Aunt Eleanor was confused at the end. I mean, she was leaving everything to a dog 5 minutes ago, and now suddenly it's Grace. That doesn't make sense. That was the moment something deep and solid shifted inside me. I turned to him, not with rage, but with clarity. She wasn't confused when she asked me to sit with her in the garden. She wasn't confused when she gave me that envelope and told me it was the right one. She knew exactly what she was doing. My voice didn't need to rise, it carried anyway. Mr. Finch nodded, folding the documents with care. "We will need to pause the distribution process while we process this updated version," he said. "But as of now, this stands as the most recent legal record of her wishes." Chelsea pushed back from the table so fast her chair screeched. "This is insane. She barely even liked you." I met her eyes, steady and calm. She loved me, and she chose me. I knew it with a certainty that settled not in my mind, but deep in my chest, steady as breath. It lived in the way she said goodbye without ever speaking the word aloud, in the weight of that envelope she had pressed into my palm. Quiet, deliberate, final. The tension in the room didn't break. It just changed. It thickened, hung there like a storm cloud, refusing to move. For the first time in years, perhaps the first time ever, Chelsea and Brandon were silent. No quips, no mockery, just stunned, uncertain quiet. The meeting ended not with a gavel strike or dramatic declaration, but with a hush so heavy it felt sacred. Mr. Douglas Finch gathered the revised will, like it was a holy relic, folding it carefully, almost reverently, and slipping it back into his leather briefcase. His fingers moved with the precision of someone who knew how fragile truth could be. Chelsea stormed out first, her heels clattering across the marble floor like angry punctuation marks. Brandon followed a second later, red-faced and unreadable, his jaw clenched as though it took everything in him not to lash out. I didn't move. I sat there, spine heavy against the high-backed chair, limbs numb from adrenaline and disbelief. The weight of what had just happened hadn't fully landed yet. It hovered just above me, waiting to descend. But something within me had shifted. For the first time since Eleanor passed, I didn't feel helpless. The tide had turned. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I no longer felt like I was drowning. When the door clicked shut behind them, Mr. Finch turned to me. Really turned. There was no pretense in his gaze, no professional detachment. He looked at me like a man who had just witnessed something rare and solemn. She was very clear, Grace. He said, his voice softer than it had been all morning, more lucid than I'd seen her in months. She knew what she wanted. I swallowed the question in my throat, too dense to come out easily. Did she say anything else? He hesitated. Just a second, but it felt like a moment caught between heartbeats. Only that this wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about rewarding someone. Someone who loved her without asking for anything in return. I nodded, slowly, my throat tight. There was nothing left to say. I rose to my feet and stepped out of that office and into a world that somehow felt entirely different than the one I'd walked into just an hour earlier. Outside, the sky had dulled to a soft, pewter gray clouds hanging low over the city like a veil. The wind had turned sharp, and I pulled my coat tighter around me as if to hold in the warmth of what little certainty I had just gained. My fingers trembled like they hadn't yet caught up to the transformation that had just occurred. I knew what was coming next. Appeals lawyers, heated exchanges. Ava and Brandon wouldn't go quietly. They'd try to claw their way back to the money they thought was owed to them, the legacy they'd imagined as their birthright. But I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Not because I had the will, but because I had her Eleanor's truth, her trust, and the bond that not even death had managed to unmake. That night, I returned to the house we had shared, the house that now felt both sacred and spectral, echoing with the memories of quiet dinners, whispered lullabies, and the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath her slippers. As I opened the front door, Sir Barkington padded toward me with unbothered joy, his tiny tail wagging as if the universe had never changed. I bent down, scooped him up, and pressed my forehead gently to the soft fluff between his ears. "Looks like it's just us now," I whispered. The evening passed in stillness. I wandered from room to room, pausing to read every document Eleanor had left behind. I sifted through old prescription notes, insurance letters, post-it reminders in her sharp, looping script, "Call Dr. Lynn for Grace. Order more of her chamomile tea." Even in her last months, even when her memory began to falter, she was thinking of me. And then I found it. Tucked into the drawer of her nightstand beneath a sachet of lavender and an old pair of reading glasses was an envelope. The scent clung to it, soft, familiar, unmistakably hers. My name was written on the front in that same precise hand. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling again, though not from fear this time, just reverence. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No grand declarations, no melodrama, just her voice distilled and direct. "My dearest Grace, you gave me dignity, joy, and love when I had nothing left to offer. You were my home. This is not a gift. It is a reflection of what was always yours. Love, Eleanor." Tears came quietly. I didn't even realize I was crying until the ink blurred slightly, the paper growing damp where my fingers clutched it. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It wasn't about the house or the vintage car or even the ridiculous pearl-studded leash Sir Barkington wore like royalty. It was about us, what we had, what we were. That night I made a promise to myself. I would not let Chelsea and Brandon rewrite the truth. I wouldn't let them reduce Eleanor's love to some petty legal battle or smear campaign. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one, but I would show up armed with more than just a will. I'd show up with the truth. Because when someone gives you a love that deep, that unearned and unwavering, you defend it. Fiercely. Unapologetically. 2 weeks later, I found myself once again seated in that same conference room. Same cold varnished table. Same high-backed leather chairs. Same ticking wall clock that seemed to mock the passage of time. But I wasn't the same woman who had walked in before, half crushed by disbelief. I wasn't the invisible caregiver in the corner. I was the woman Eleanor had chosen. Chelsea and Brandon sat across from me, dressed in dark, somber colors, like they were attending a funeral, which in a way they were. This was the death of their expectations, the burial of every entitled dream they had built around Eleanor's wealth. Chelsea's face was stone, but her leg bounced under the table with a rhythm that betrayed her. Brandon, usually loud and boisterous, was quieter than I had ever seen him, tapping his pen against a closed notepad like a man waiting for lines he hadn't rehearsed. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, his voice steady, and practiced a man who had clearly presided over more than his fair share of family implosions. "I've reviewed the updated will," he began, "as well as the documentation submitted by the witnesses and medical professionals who were present at the time of its signing." He looked up, scanning each of our faces. "There is no legal basis for contesting it." Chelsea stood abruptly, her chair screeching backward. She wasn't in her right mind. She shouted, her voice cracking. She thought the dog was her husband for 2 days last month. "She had good days," I said, interrupting, my voice calm but unyielding. "You wouldn't know that. You weren't there." My words echoed in the room, too measured to be shouted, too sharp to be ignored. She knew exactly what she was doing when she gave me that envelope. She was clear-focused and tired of pretending that holiday visits and fake smiles meant you deserved any part of her life. Brandon slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp and childish. You manipulated her. Mr. Finch raised his hand, voice stern. Enough. The documents are legally binding. The will leaves the estate in its entirety to Miss Grace Mitchell. Silence fell like a gavel. Chelsea's face collapsed for the briefest moment, raw and unguarded, before the mask returned. So that's it, she sneered. She hands everything over to her little pet project, and we're just supposed to smile and walk away. I met her eyes, steady and soft. You don't have to smile, I said. You just have to leave. It wasn't vengeance, it wasn't even triumph, it was truth. It was closure. Mr. Finch slid a folder toward me, his fingers precise, careful, as though even this final gesture carried the weight of a ceremony. There are a few transition documents for you to sign, he said with quiet finality, and the keys will be delivered tomorrow morning. I nodded, though the gesture felt detached, my body moving on instinct, while my mind hovered somewhere else, somewhere between disbelief and strange relief. My fingertips grazed the folder's edge, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Across the table, Chelsea stood abruptly, her movements jerky and raw. She gathered her purse with the graceless tension of someone who wasn't sure whether to scream or sob, her posture stiff like a marionette whose strings had been yanked too hard. She glared at me, not just looked, but truly searched me, as though she might still find some fragment of guilt, some glimmer of doubt or hesitation she could latch onto. But I gave her nothing. Not pity, not gloating. Only the quiet, steady certainty that had guided every step I'd taken since the moment I opened Eleanor's letter. Brandon followed her out, red-faced and tight-lipped, his anger simmering just beneath the surface, but he, too, said nothing. No final jabs, no parting threat. Just the bitter silence of someone who'd realized the script had been rewritten without him. When the door shut behind them, the room fell into a strange, almost reverent silence, the kind that follows a storm when the air is still heavy and charged, but the worst has already passed. Mr. Finch looked at me again this time, not as a lawyer, but as a man who had just witnessed something irrevocable and deeply human. His voice softened into something close to compassion. She made the right choice, he said. I didn't respond. I couldn't, not yet. My eyes were wet, but I wasn't weeping. My heart ached in that peculiar way grief does when it's braided with love, heavy and beautiful and unshakably real. It had never been about the house, or the money, or even the will. It was about knowing in the end that she saw me, that she chose me, and that I had honored her exactly the way she deserved. 2 days passed. The final meeting felt both immediate and impossibly distant, like something that had happened years ago in another life. The house was too quiet now, not just in sound, but in spirit, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for me to decide what came next. I moved through the rooms slowly, almost reverently, as though walking through someone else's memory. The sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, just the way it used to, scattering delicate patterns across the hardwood floor, and behind me Sir Barkington padded along his tiny paws, clicking with rhythmic elegance, tail bobbing with cheerful ignorance. Or maybe not ignorance. Maybe he did know. Maybe he had felt the shift in the air too, and simply trusted that everything would be okay now. I paused in the doorway of Eleanor's study. The room still held the faint scent of rose perfume, mingled with the musty sweetness of old books and time. Her teacup still sat on the desk, a ring of dried lavender leaves settled in the bottom like forgotten offerings. I picked it up gently, my thumb tracing the handle's worn curve, and let the tide of emotion come. Grief, yes, but also love and memory, and a fierce protectiveness that surged through me. It would have been so easy to reduce all this to numbers. Estate values, property transfers, legal wins and losses, but none of that mattered. What mattered was her. What mattered was us. I hadn't won anything. I had been chosen, and that distinction made all the difference. Over the next week, I found comfort in quiet rituals. I wrote thank you notes to the nurses who had cared for Eleanor in her final months, trying to put into words the gratitude I felt for the way they had shown up, not just professionally, but humanly. I arranged donations to the animal shelter, where Eleanor had volunteered for years, her name now listed as a benefactor. And in the corner of the garden she had loved most, I built a quiet tribute, a small wooden bench, her name carved into the backrest, surrounded by the lavender she had adored. I sit there some mornings with Sir Barkington curled in my lap, a mug of tea warming my hands, and I just listen to the birds, to the breeze, to the peace. Sometimes I think about that day in the lawyer's office, about how easy it would have been to remain silent, to let the pain sink inward, while Chelsea and Brandon rewrote Eleanor's story to suit their narrative. But I didn't, because I knew her, and I knew who I was to her. We don't always get the goodbye we want. Sometimes people vanish without closure, without explanations, without final words. But once in a while, if we're very lucky, we get clarity. We get proof that we mattered. And that kind of love, that kind of recognition, it's everything. Chelsea and Brandon never reached out again. I hadn't expected them to. Part of me, some secret defiant part, almost wished they had, just so I could have stood in front of them one last time and defended her all over again. But they didn't. They faded like background noise that had finally stopped humming. And in that silence, I found peace. And if you're still here, if you're watching this, and you've ever felt like the quiet one, overlooked, uncelebrated, unnoticed, if you've ever given your time, your heart, your everything, and wondered whether it even mattered, let me tell you it does. Even if no one claps, even if there's no spotlight or applause. Sometimes love is a note left in the margin. Sometimes it's the smell of lavender, or the softness of a dog's fur, or the silence of a room filled with memories. Sometimes it's an envelope no one else even knows exists. But it's real, and it's enough. She saw me, she chose me, and in the end I chose her right back. That's my story. It isn't just about inheritance or courtroom twists. It's about love, the kind that's loyal, quiet, and unshakably true. It's about showing up when it matters most. And standing up for the people we love even when we're the only ones left who will. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you've loved and lost, or someone who showed up when no one else did, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment, like the video, subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one, because I think there are so many of us out there carrying these quiet truths, and I promise you I'm just getting started. Thanks for listening.